Continuing to update what is an evolving story for the Brooklyn Nets and Kyrie Irving, an emergency episode for the Locked On Nets podcast, as the Brooklyn Nets have announced they will be suspending Kyrie Irving. We break it all down next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over here is Adam Armbrecht. That's me. Weird way to phrase it. But over there is Doug Norrie. Obviously, this is an emergency podcast episode, so we dispense with the pleasantries, Doug, as I was on earlier, did a live broadcast on YouTube discussing the 1, 2, 3, and 4 steps that have occurred here with Kyrie Irving, and obviously the initial post around anti-Semitic comments and commentary from an Amazon Prime video, followed up by a level of interactions with the media, with the organization, with the ADL as well, and ultimately leading now to the suspension of one Kyrie Irving. You have the quote there from the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah, for sure. And just going to be a quick apologies for my background and for my sound here on vacation, but wanted to jump on for this real quick. Just wanted to give everyone the heads up about why this is going the way it is in the background here on YouTube. But yeah, big news. Obviously, I'm just going to read the whole statement from the Nets. I might paraphrase a few parts, but for the most part, you're going to get the whole thing here. This is via Shams, but it was basically came via Nets Media. Over the last several days, we have made repeated attempts to work with Kyrie Irving to help him understand the harm and danger of his words and actions, which began with him publicizing a film containing deeply disturbing anti-Semitic hate. We believe that taking the path of education in this challenging situation would be the right one, and thought that we had made progress with our joint commitment to eradicating hate and intolerance. We were dismayed today when we give an opportunity in a media session that Kyrie refused to unequivocally say that he has no anti-Semitic beliefs nor acknowledge specific hateful material in the film. This was not the first time he had the opportunity, but failed to clarify. Such failure to disavow anti-Semitism when given a clear opportunity to do so is deeply disturbing, is against the values of our organization, and constitute conduct detrimental to the team. Accordingly, we are of the view that he is currently unfit to be associated with the Brooklyn Nets. I'm going to add my own thing. Those are pretty big words. Back to the quote, we have decided that Kyrie will serve a suspension without pay until he satisfies a series of objective remedial measures that address the harmful impact of his conduct, and the suspension period served is no less than 5 games. That's the whole statement that was released.
Yeah, and I think just to briefly recap what I had covered earlier today, obviously Kyrie Irving, after having the joint statement that was released by the Brooklyn Nets and Kyrie Irving, both the organization and Kyrie were providing $500,000 donations to the ADL to continue the education process around fighting not only anti-Semitism, but hate speech in any form or fashion. There was the immediate follow-up, though, after that joint statement from the organization and Kyrie from Adam Silver, where he expressed his disappointment in Kyrie Irving's, what you read there from the organization, in Kyrie Irving's refusal to directly apologize and directly speak down anti-Semitism and any notion that he may be associated with those narratives. I find it probably that this comes from both sides, Doug. The organization wanting to move past this, obviously, in any form or fashion they could. I talked about it earlier that the organization seemed to be willing to assess what the blowback was going to be here before making any definitive decisions. And then on the heels of the interaction that Kyrie had earlier today at the media session, where effectively, when asked directly by a member of the media, do you have any anti-Semitic beliefs? He did not unequivocally say, no, I do not. He chose to address it in his own way. And I'm not going to sit here and deliberate his choice of words or how he chose to address it, short of saying it seemed like a pretty direct opportunity for him to just say, no, of course not, and I want to move on from this. That was not the way in which he chose to handle it. and this is now effectively the fallout from it.
It's so weird. You and I were texting during the day today. We're actually texting right before this about this situation, just going over it. And I had sent out a tweet. Literally, I got to be 5 seconds before the Woj tweet went out, and I said something along the lines of that the Nets bet to miss the playoffs was looking like something like a value. The reason I'm bringing that up is because it followed a day's worth of me thinking, and I think us talking about that we just had this strong feeling, or we're starting to get this suspect on a strong level that this actually might be a pretty big turning point for Kyrie and the Nets. Like this day in particular, that all this stuff was leading in a place that just didn't seem, I mean, clearly not positive. That's goes without saying, totally understatement. But it actually maybe was reaching some sort of weird critical point where the Nets were going to feel like they had I'm not debating this thing real quick, but the Nets were going to feel like they were in some kind of corner about what to do about the situation. He clearly didn't answer the press conference questions in a way that most people that covered it felt acceptable. And I was like, man, I could just see this situation really spiraling now, because if the organization was already of the we've kind of had it mentality with Kyrie, which you already got the sense that they were not offering him a contract in the offseason, letting this play out, and then this comes up, I really started to think, I was like, this might be it. I earlier said out there on record, I said it's on the table that he's not a Net at the end of the season, and it might not be from a trade, because I was like, I think this could go towards suspension, like just because it just kind of seemed obvious. I hate to have been right about this, because this really sucks on every level. Like if you're a fan, if you're anti-Kyrie, pro-Kyrie, it's all of it's bad, right? Like it's just a really, really bad situation. But from a predictable standpoint, like who couldn't have seen this coming? It's been barreling toward this for a week now, and in some ways barreling toward this for 2 or 3 years now. And I'll be honest, I'd be shocked if he was back with the Nets. I'd be shocked. I know they said minimum 5 games. This language was so harsh. I'm sorry, I'm going on here. This language was so harsh by the Nets in this statement that I actually don't think it leaves the window all that open for him to come back. I think this really might be it.
Well, let's be clear here too. I mean, so you said the minimum of 5 games, so that's just the starting point for it. And if we're being honest too, it does. I wouldn't get the sense. It's not like this is, minute 1 of what's gone on here, the circumstance. This is now days into it, and you don't get the sense that Kyrie Irving is looking to say or do anything that's going to appease the organization or appease the NBA at large. That's completely his prerogative. But that would also then, to your point, suggest that, okay, now you've been suspended. There's a world where Kyrie Irving chooses to walk away.
That's what I mean. Well, that's what I mean. I'm not saying that the Nets may never bring him back. Sorry. Right. I have the mind too. We know what Kyrie's personality is. He is not a guy who we've seen wants to back down in situations where he believes he's right. He clearly believes he's right here. He clearly believes he did nothing wrong. Fine. That's his prerogative. But we also know, my statement was actually as much about Kyrie as it was about the Nets. It's a situation where I think they've actually both sides have given themselves almost no room to have it work out.
I also think too, we can say that this, and you mentioned, you kind of intimated it there as well, that this is also the culmination of, and by the way, this current circumstance is the most volatile one when it comes to the subject matter and what's potentially being said here, or what's being inferred, right, and the communities that are being damaged by it. The other instances that we could say leading up to this were primarily Kyrie Irving centric, right? It was about what he personally wanted to do or not do, or even when it comes to going back to last season and the vaccination process, that's a personal choice and set to the backdrop of an unprecedented set of circumstances where you didn't know which way the wind was going to blow there and whether or not a particular city was going to have rules and guidelines, right? And the organization is trying to make decisions on the fly. However, it is now 1, 2, 3, 4, however many sets of circumstances that have come up around Kyrie Irving, to the point where I'm so fascinated, just to pull back from this for a second. We know that the Ime Udoka hiring seems to be coming, although a big pause button has been pushed on announcing that, as you would safely understand here from Brooklyn Nets side of it. I can't tell if the Brooklyn Nets were trying to save something or preparing for the breakdown of what was currently going on here. As you said, you and I were going back and forth here. I don't know how this plays out. I think you're totally correct that it could be Kyrie Irving that walks away. It could be the organization that walks away. There's no reason to think that the relationship extends beyond this year. Obviously, that seems a foregone conclusion.
That's over. Like there's no way.
Yeah, and there seems very little right now. I'd say there's very little chance that even a pennies on the dollar trade could happen here for Kyrie Irving, because it would be about as toxic of an asset that you could attach yourself to. Not Kyrie Irving the player, but just the circumstance. Name me the number of teams that are going to be willing to go into these PR waters that currently surround Kyrie Irving. The next step to that is then, though, if that is going to potentially be, or could likely be the first step here, what happens with Kevin Durant, who in the offseason requested a trade and then requested for a change to come organizationally? We've already seen Steve Nash be fired here. I don't think that anybody, and you can list anyone inside the organization on or off the court, who would walk into Joe Tsai's office and say, hey, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. And you and I talked about after Steve Nash's firing, for whatever he was not as a head coach, I was not completely sold on the idea that he wasn't as much a catalyst for wanting to be done as anything else, because of everything that comes with being associated with this organization right now. And almost 99% of it has nothing to do with basketball.
Yeah, it's just it's been a mess top to bottom from this team, basically since we said this multiple times. I'll go back to the first round series against the Celtics when the guys get hurt, and right in the beginning of the Bucks series when Kyrie twists his ankle. It's like basically from then has been all downside, and or expectations not met. It's a really sad situation. I don't really, there's no part of, I love watching Kyrie Irving play basketball. There's nothing. I'm able to separate those things, and that's just what it is, right? And like, this is a sad situation all throughout it, and it's just it feels like an impossible situation just from if we're talking from a basketball media and whatever else, public opinion, optics, all of the stuff around this is a very, very difficult situation, I think, to try to know what is right or wrong to do, right? But I do think if we are going to use history, or at least the brief history that we have of Kyrie Irving as the player and the Brooklyn Nets as an organization to sort of inform what might go over here, is that what we do know about Kyrie is when he believes that he's correct about something, or in this case, maybe believes he's not wrong about something, or has been clear or hasn't obfuscated or whatever it is, he doesn't do a lot of about faces if you really push him, right? We saw this. We already have a direct one-to-one comp for the situation last year with the vaccine mandate. He did what he thought thought was correct. Fine. We were super clear in the time. I mean, both of us had differing opinions about this also at the time, I think. But in the end, it doesn't really matter what the opinions are. We know what he did. He had an idea of what he thought was correct, what he thought was incorrect. And he was willing. The dollars didn't matter. The media stuff didn't matter. That was all fine with him. And I think if we use that as a comp for this situation, I will lean even harder into the idea that I just don't see a path for him to come back. If he feels like this is a situation where he's being like, we don't know, by the way. I don't know. He has not responded to this. As of this recording, he has not, I don't believe, had shared anything publicly beyond the earlier press conference that he did. He might come out and say, if he comes out and says something like recalcitrant about like what his actions were, then I will change this. But if he doesn't, I think we know sort of probably how he views the situation. I have to believe, after watching the mini press conference today, he believes that what he did and what he said was acceptable and fine, and that's where his like sort of feeling around the situation was. I think he thinks he was being clear about it. And I think if he believes that to be the case, then this is obviously not going to sit very well with him. And if the Nets have outlined some kind of plan, which they were not specific about, but they were clear that there was like multi-step process that needed to happen for him in order to be able to come back to basketball activities. I mean, is there like any chance it happens? I hope I'm wrong. I would love for this to just come back and be fine, right? But like
the weird part for me too, in all of this, not weird part, but the interesting part to me is there was, after the initial press conference where he was having a confrontational, and I'm not saying just him, collectively, right? It's a difficult press conference that's going on. Although, and I don't need to mince words about it. He was ready to go back at some of the reporters asking questions. And I think that there's a history that's built up there over his entire tenure, probably in the NBA in general.
By the way, I'm going to say one thing. I actually think in a lot of cases, he's gotten an unfair shake with some of the media.
Well, I was going to say, very, yes, it's very good to bring up. By and large, I don't think that his interactions with the media have ever necessarily been fair coming from the media side. Correct. Going towards him. They've usually been prodding. They've usually been trying to get something out of him, to garner
looking for
a
quote, trying to push, 100%. Looking for a quote, pushing for a reaction, placing, like doing some things that would be considered not reporting, but angle shooting around one of those things. From those standpoints, I not maybe necessarily around this one in particular, but from those standpoints, I actually side with Kyrie, because I do think there's times where he hasn't gotten a fair shake.
To use the phrase, I think oftentimes the media tries to troll Kyrie in order to get a reaction out of him.
Agreed.
In this particular circumstance, I think that he was ready to be combative around this particular topic. Now, that being the case, though, we're now at a circumstance here where he has that press conference. They cut that one short. The PR stopped it. Sean Marks came out in his press conference, which, by the way, he did not look great in or come off particularly, responsive or forward thinking inside of what was going on. He said, we want to let cooler heads prevail. He did not come out and make unequivocal statements around the sentiment or what was being said or what was being done. It was all generally saying, let's take a pause and let's take a breath. And there is that side of it where they connected with the ADL and had these conversations. Essentially, some people would suggest saying, how big is the blowback going to be? What would be the proper response here for us to avoid further inflaming this situation within the Jewish community, within the Brooklyn Nets community, everything within the city, right? They paused that, and then they let him get back, but then they put the media back in front of him, though. And it does seem like you could have pushed as long a pause around putting Kyrie back in front of the microphone as you may have liked, or at least a little more time. My curiosity now becomes, what were the behind the doors conversations with Kyrie before he gets back in front of the media and has that discussion? Because this reaction from Brooklyn then makes it sound like we had closed doors discussions. We thought we took the steps to move forward from this. We put you back out in front of the media to clean this up and let's move on. And Kyrie was not ready or willing to do that. And that's his prerogative. But that's what seems like is going on here, is a very much a back and forth inside the organization and with Kyrie, where they are not on the same page. They've never been on the same page. And neither one of them, particularly Kyrie, is willing to take that stance of, okay, made a mistake, let's move past this. It's a mess. It's 100% a mess. And this is a complete 180 from where we perceived this organization, 3.5-4 years ago? They have gone from being what was considered to be one of the most stable franchises, one of the franchises that can attract superstar talent, to now being objectively one of the most poorly run organizations that you can think of in the NBA.
It's a total circus. It's an absolute total circus. It's embarrassing on every level. I'm not personally embarrassed. It's just like embarrassing if you're a professional basketball team. It's like It's been mismanaged and again, every level. I think you can say this. You can find fault in every single decision maker and stakeholder in this organization over the last couple of years, for sure. Like, no one here is off the hook. I will say too, it will be awful hard. I'm not going to come in with any opinion here. It'll also be hard to take the moral high ground here if they are about to hire Ime too, because he's coming with his own set of just sort of off court issues. And so if you're going to make this hire, after another team suspended a guy for conduct unbecoming the team, and then try to take a moral stance around another player, that's a weird look. You know what I mean? That just is. It's just it'd be really hard. It'd be really hard to explain one and explain the other if you're trying to make. I'm not going to necessarily comparing what the issues are. It's just saying that it's just another example of questionable decision making, sort of across the board from everyone involved. And I mean,
it does ring like an organization. On the Ime Udoka potential hire that seems imminent. It does speak to an organization that looks like it was flailing at trying to save this thing. Right? You come into the season, you don't fire Steve Nash in the offseason. You start the season with him. 7 games in, you fire him. Now you go and you get a coach that is not necessarily squeaky clean. As we talked about when we discussed it on the podcast, you said this might be the only coach that the Nets could really attract to this job, and the only job that this coach could really be attracted to, given both of those circumstances. So it does just, from an organization standpoint alone, it does feel like they were trying to salvage this thing. And in the midst of it, you have Kyrie Irving, who is willing to hold his own opinions and not necessarily fall into the mantra of, hey, we're trying to get this thing back on track. And I do find it very interesting to wonder about how Kevin Durant and the team overall. But remember, when initially asked about this, Kevin Durant said it doesn't affect anybody. That's for the media and everybody else. Everyone inside the locker room, we're good. We're focused on basketball. I find it hard to believe that this is not going to have an impact on the team overall, obviously, and on the decisions of specifically Kevin Durant and how he perceives being a part of the Brooklyn Nets going forward.
It's over. I'm not even saying that. Like, this isn't even a reaction. This isn't a hot take. This isn't like an emotional reaction by me or an in the moment thing. I've actually been thinking this, and we've been discussing this to some degree off the air for the last 48 to 72 hours. We didn't, we came in with some, I don't want to call it excitement around the possibility of the Ime thing, because it felt, not excitement is the wrong word, but it felt like, okay, well, at least this is like a proven guy. But I think if you add up all of what's happening here, really all the way down, how is this not just over? And when I say over, I mean championship aspirations. I mean the core of this team that everyone thought was the core of the team coming in, coming into this season as continuing to stay on. Let's just go down the list. Okay, the coach is already gone.
Yep.
Udoka is not even necessarily firmly in the door yet, so we don't even know what that situation is. Simmons is hurt. The knee situation.
But by the way, completely and rightfully so, but completely going by the wayside is that he's being sit down and not on the road trip with the knee issue.
He has a knee issue, so he's not traveling. Who knows the timetable on that? You have Kyrie, who's gone minimum 4 games, maybe forever. And then you have Kevin Durant and question mark, right? Like I don't know if you're frankly, I wouldn't be shocked if the next thing that happens, you can call this, it's 8. I'm in a different time zone. It's 8:20 Eastern on Thursday evening. I would not be shocked if Kevin Durant asked for a trade in the next 7 days. And that feels way long for me. Like, how could you not? What do you possibly see as the reason to stay here? We already saw it once where he wanted out as a member of the team. We are very, very, not very long removed from that already having happened. Once we already know that's on the table for him, right? Yeah. Like, since we already know that's on the table, we already know what the Kyrie stance is on the table for him. Like, now that we know these things, I'd be floored if he didn't. Like, if he for some reason said, yeah, it's like I'm riding or dying with the Nets now, that would actually be more shocking to me, because I just don't even see how you can. What is there a salvage here? I mean. You can hear me like breathless. I can't. I'm trying to think of a situation. I guess the world where Kyrie came out in the next like day and said like, okay, I was wrong and I'm going to do all the things and I'm going to come back in 5 games. Then I would change my stance on that. But short of that, I just don't see how this is salvageable at this point. It's just not.
Well, and
it
let's
ran
put it
its
this
course,
way too.
and
I'm going to tell you right now, because so even just say the Kyrie, put the Kyrie to the side for a second. The only way that it's salvageable from a Kevin Durant standpoint is if the entire reason that you're bringing back Ime Udoka is because it was, it's reported that he had a very good rapport with Kevin Durant, that they had a good relationship, and that maybe that's the guy that Kevin Durant wanted to be the head coach prior to the start of last season, right? Maybe that is a little bit of something for you. However, just from no matter what. They're not winning a championship.
Oh, no.
It doesn't matter. No. Kyrie Irving could do all the right things, say whatever is required, and clean this up and be back on the court. They're not winning a championship. No. Like, it doesn't work. And this is when we talked about coming into the season. This is one of the things that we discussed privately and on the podcast, where I just said the number of times that the teams have this much kind of stuff going on and still are high level successful is so rare. And I know Chicago Bulls with Dennis Rodman. Great. That's Dennis Rodman taking vacation trips to Vegas and showing up and playing basketball.
And those teams had already won.
And
Jordan had already won. Like, this is not a comp. Those aren't the Kobe Shaq thing is not a comp. None of these are comps. There is no comp. I was actually thinking about this earlier. I was trying to think of a team that's been more embattled over the really almost at any professional level, specifically basketball, that's been more embattled around like negative stuff over the last couple years than the Nets. The only thing I was like the Malice and the Palace Pacers. Like I don't know of another, and I'm not even saying that's a comp for the situation necessarily, because that was like a violent act, and this is different. The stuff with the Nets is different, but it's like, what are the comps for this? There's never been anything that's no, because actually, frankly, most teams have never even gotten a chance to get this bad. Even if there's a runway, it falls apart way before this. It falls apart way before this. So, and from that standpoint, there are no comps. Most organizations aren't able to stay together well before it reaches situations like this, where it's just has completely and utterly fallen apart. I don't know how Marks keeps his job after this year. I don't know how, who coaches the thing. I don't know what happens. I just think really on every level, this has been, and I know we're specifically talking about the Kyrie thing here, but it's really just endemic of what's really gone on with this team over the last couple of years. I find it hilarious that we started. I mean, how many days away are we where you and I made the promise to each other to stay positive no matter what? Like we kind of had like another off-air talk. We're like, positivity above all. Doesn't matter what the record is. Let's get like 15 games. We're going to come to this podcast with as much positivity as possible, because I think that like that will just do the Nets world really good to try to stay really positive almost no matter what. They talk basketball, talk hoops, talk the things that look good, things that can change. I mean, that did not last long, and now I just don't see how it even comes back. So this is just it's just such a crazy situation.
And just to reiterate, the Brooklyn Nets announced that they'll be suspending Kyrie Irving for a minimum of 5 games without pay until he meets what they deem to be certain thresholds and requirements to get himself back in good standings with the organization. As it said, cannot allow him to be associated with the Brooklyn Nets.
I'm glad you said that, because that was that I stopped there during reading the statement. That is such a definitive term, and I'm so glad you remember that and brought that back up. To use the words "not to be associated with." If you think about how suspensions are typically handed out and how teams typically talk about player suspensions, usually it's like a player made a mistake, or we're working together, or they're going to serve a punishment, whatever. It's a fight, PED stuff, like whatever the normal things around suspensions usually. To say that you're not going to be associated with somebody is like saying we're done with you completely unless you're able to do a certain amount of things. Again, we don't know what those things are. It's probably some kind of apology / sensitivity training / I don't know. I'm just guessing.
I'll be honest with you though. To your point about the way that it was phrased, there may be a list of things that the organization would want him to do. I don't think that it exists though in reality. No. Because otherwise you would not frame it that way.
That's why there was a path back. Sorry to interrupt. It's such a definitive thing to say. It's such a end of thing. Like, I don't want to be like, if you say you don't want to be associated with somebody, it means you don't want to have anything to do with them. And usually there's oftentimes no coming back from statements like that. Like, there's just, because it's just going to be viewed by all parties as, definitive, which it basically is. When I read that, I just thought, I just don't see when you combine Kyrie's just, overall gestalt, in terms of how he just sort of, have we seen him operate in the past around stuff like this, he was not going to want to come back. He's not going to ever feel like he's not going to want to come back to the team. Even if he thought like he wanted to get back on the court or whatever, I could see him having as much anger and, feel like he was mistreated in his mind around what's happened. And if that's the case, I just don't see a path. And so I'm really glad you remember the associated part, because I just think that wording is so harsh and so definitive, that when you really think about it and drill down on it, and again, knowing all the things we know and knowing about all the things that have happened with this team and Kyrie and the team and all over the last couple of years, and knowing probably how the Nets felt about Kyrie going into the season, because the easiest way to know how a team feels about something is with their wallets, right? Yep. It's like, that's it. It's very, in sports, it's actually very, very easy to figure this stuff out. Usually it's, if we like it, we will pay for it. And if we don't like it, we will not pay for it. That's easy. And you can just know, and you can say all the things you want in the world. Like, we believe in this guy or whatever. When you do not make a financial commitment to somebody, you don't believe it. And the Nets had a choice in the offseason whether or not to do that. I mean, I guess they made some offers and it wasn't, to Kyrie's liking, but it didn't get all the way there. There's no chance it ever does now. And like, I just think we already know. So I think they probably saw, maybe the Nets in a lot of ways saw this as an opportunity to end the situation, under some terms that they feel like makes their I hate to say it like this, but like their lives easier.
I know exactly. I knew exactly where you're going to go there with just the idea. Like this particular instance is different and unique to anything else that has occurred. And also, if you are an organization that is looking to part ways with a player, this is a pretty easy one. This is a pretty easy opportunity to take a moral stand, to take a moral high ground in this particular instance, and not feel as though you're going to suffer as much backlash, which, by the way, just inside of this conversation, we're talking about 13 different ways that the wind is blowing right now, and the Brooklyn Nets trying to catch the right tailwind here to come out of this thing, not just perceptually, not just from a public standpoint, and not, again, I think that people's minds and hearts can be in the right place genuinely, and also, you just mentioned it. You put up with a lot of things when the product makes you money. And when it feels like the product isn't making you money anymore, it's a lot easier to look at things a little bit more critically. And that feels like what's come to a head here as well. The one thing I want to ask you about too, is like, this seems insane, that Ime Udoka, with everything going on with him, is, as we all think, going to be the next head coach. There's a world. If the idea was you were coming in to salvage this situation and with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, there's a world where Ime Udoka says, "Oh, thank you so much, but maybe I will just see what happens here before I commit to joining an organization that I effectively, I mean, who knows, building it from the ground up, etc." But you have no idea what this team and organization is going to look like over the next 3 months. And we've talked about this with Kevin Durant, with Sean Marks, with Steve Nash. If you don't know who the GM is going to be or who the owner might be 6 months to a year from now, that's a commitment for anybody, from the players all the way up. A commitment to say, "Oh, I want to come be a part of this." Maybe that's why there's a lot going on to not announce that, obviously. But I can't even assume, even though Ime has his own issues right now, that he's looking at this as being, this is where I go to reclaim my reputation. There has to be a better option here in another 6 months, another year from now, potentially, for him than being a part of this.
Yeah, I mean, if we hear tomorrow that situation is devolved and is not going to happen, I mean, he's got his own set of issues here, so I don't know if he might think that the juice is worth the squeeze, because if there aren't going to be a lot of other organizations willing to sign on the dotted line with him going forward, or if like his tenure as the Celtics is clearly tenuous at best, maybe over in itself, if they're willing to let him walk, it's hard for me to evaluate that situation. So I actually kind of don't want to guess at it. And just to say, nothing would surprise me at all about it. Do you think, actually, like, another question, I guess, for you is, with Kyrie here, do you think this, I don't know how to ask this. Do you think this would have been the reaction had it not like the global reaction? I mean, like the Nets reaction, if this had been like the first thing that happened, right? Or do you think this is more of a culmination of like Kyrie history with the team, right? Do you think it's, I know that's impossible to answer, I guess on some level, because we just will never actually know. And maybe you said it before, because you made a good point where you said maybe it was just like an opportunity ripe to make some kind of move. But do you think it is like just more of a culmination?
Well, I know there was a situation with Miles Leonard, who obviously is not nearly the player that Kyrie Irving is, but he made anti-Semitic.
He's out of the NBA. He's not playing in the NBA now.
But that was it, though. And that was it. It was when that situation came up with him, done and gone. And we know how it works. Higher profile players, the better you are, the more talented you are, the longer that you're going to be able to navigate some difficult waters. The only thing I might say, no, it wouldn't have been like this if it had been the first instance. But again, nothing else that's gone on has been this. Like this would.
No, I agree.
It was typically always about Kyrie, the individual, and the organization. This now is a community thing. It's a national thing. It's a global thing, right? And that's where I think it hits differently. I would say he would still have been suspended by the Nets if this was the first thing. I would say it would still have a long road back. But as we said that statement initially, I don't think that the wording of that would have come across the same way. I think it would have been presented in a way of, we obviously value Kyrie Irving and we want to continue to have an open dialogue with him and figure out the best ways to educate ourselves and one another, etc., as opposed to this, to your point, which just feels so definitive about where you are with them. And I do wonder where this comes from. you talked about how does Sean Marks survive this? Well, this has to come from Joe Tsai or in conversations with Joe Tsai. Now, fans may think that Joe Tsai has done a terrible job and he should be gone too, that it all should be gone. But if Joe Tsai is making these initial statements, and he, by the way, the infancy of this was a back and forth between Joe Tsai and Kyrie Irving over social media around this subject matter. If he sent down the message and it goes through Sean Marks, it does feel like it's about flushing out the talent pool. And I'm putting everybody in it and restarting this thing from scratch. I'll put a question back to you. And this is probably another unanswerable one, as all this stuff is. Do you think that if you're a player on this team that is not Kevin Durant, that is not a superstar talent, are you just, Seth Curry, Joe Harris, Cam Thomas, who's already been frustrated, are you just quietly going in and be like, hey, when you get a chance, you can go ahead and you can move me? Like, do you think that just organizationally players are going to say, I don't want to stick around to see how this shakes out? How is this going to work out for me?
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see what KD comes out and says, if anything. I mean, he's usually kind of avoided these situations and stood by.
By the way, he doesn't need to come out and say anything. Just to be clear, he's not obligated to discuss anything about this, but just in terms of what he personally ends up wanting to do.
Yeah, I'd be interested. My guess is it's something along the lines of supporting Kyrie and being on the team and playing basketball, and that's what he usually says. And he's usually actually pretty. KD, for his credit, has taken almost the same stance every time with everything. Right? It's that he wants to play basketball, and that's kind of it. And I guess one trade demand aside, that's usually been a stance no matter what's happened. And I think that we'll probably get. I'm again just guessing at it, but we've listened to a lot of KD quotes over the years, and I think that is usually how it stands. I think for the role players, if that's how we want to just label them, I don't know if there's really any leverage to do anything there with any of these guys, and I don't think that they probably have leverage to go and say I want to move. And there's no saying that you move some of these guys and another group of guys that you trade for come in and they want to be moved too. And just because, right. Because the situation, I also have usually on the mind that there's only so many positions, only so many places to play basketball in the NBA. And when you're on one of those teams, unless you are of a very elite group of guys, most other people kind of just go about their business because that's the NBA and there's only so many spots. And sometimes if you have a spot, that's better than something else. I don't know,
and not to, because sometimes obviously it always becomes Kyrie Irving and then it's Kevin Durant because he's the best player on the team and he's associated with Kyrie so heavily. Joe Harris was asked about this and he said, no, I wasn't even this initially. I wasn't even aware of the tweet or whatever it was, just coming in, getting ready for the game, etc. So, I mean, I'm not trying to cast it as only Kevin Durant responds or frames it.
He's the quote that everyone's going to wait for, though.
100%. But so my curiosity now, in a lot of ways, because I said, "Oh, who's going to request a trade?" Maybe it's more just that even the Brooklyn Nets, if the resolution of this is no more Kyrie Irving, and we think that the Kevin Durant domino could fall, then if you're the Brooklyn Nets, you're also looking at your own roster and saying, that's I find it endlessly fascinating. What happens out of this? Are they still waiting to see? Do they believe that Ben Simmons can get healthy and be a part of this team, and that Kevin Durant will be willing to be here? And then you keep all these players together. And even though I don't think they'll achieve the ultimate goal, you can keep on going down this road and trying to convince yourself that you can compete for a championship, as opposed to Seth Curry and Joe Harris. You have assets on this team now that you can turn and start to strip away, which would ultimately lead to the final piece being Kevin Durant. But ironically, we talked about this last in the offseason, the trade demand and where's the value? Well, you couldn't possibly let him go for anything less. And, you're never going to get market value. What's it going to look like now? And I know that's a secondary and maybe somewhat trivial commentary to this circumstance, but nobody's valuable on your roster now, even though they are valuable. If you thought that Kevin Durant wasn't getting market value in the offseason, how do you think it's going to look now if the organization, if the league knows they're stripping this thing down? It's not going to last here. Where does it go from here? And the one other thing I did just want to bring up when we're talking about specifically about Kyrie, it was the first time in the last game where seemingly the off the court stuff was impacting him. We said all season long, at the start of the season, that he was as dialed in on both ends of the floor. It was a 4-point performance, seemed a little bit lackadaisical out there, seemed like justifiably that these things were impacting him. That's the first time that we've seen it come from the off the court onto the court. And I think that can't be overlooked here as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're allowed to have bad games. Like that's happens. I don't. Yeah, it did seem a little odd. It was like easily his worst game as a net.
Right.
Firing the Nash thing, or excuse me, following the firing of Nash, or the Nash leaving, or following these kind of things in the media. And clearly there was things that were going on behind the scenes, and maybe he felt like this was possibly on the table. There was almost definitely some clear strife behind what the organization wanted him to do and what he wanted to do, and that's can't help. There's no chance that doesn't affect you on the court, almost definitely. Yeah, I think when looking back with a clear mirror, or excuse me, a clear lens about like everything that's transpired since, looking at that game and saying there was definitely something else going on, or something building to this, right?
Yep.
Like there's clearly this doesn't come out of nowhere. Like the suspension piece, I mean, we know it doesn't come out of nowhere, but between these two parties, right, between Kyrie and between the Nets, there's this has clearly been building behind the scenes for quite some time, with probably some really not great dialogue between them, or not at all dialogue, because they saw fit to hand down a pretty unprecedented suspension here. Like I can't remember a suspension happening because of, I mean, like something like this, right? Can you think of one? I'm sure there are. I'm sure there has been.
Yeah,
we've seen situations where, like a la the Josh Primo situation, where it's like, hey, someone acted maybe in a certain way off the court, and we're just going to cut ties with you completely. Like we've seen that situation happen before. But the part where it's like some sort of indefinite suspension because of how what got shared or was spoken, I don't really remember a lot of, and definitely no one of Kyrie's like talent level, right? Like there's that, I can't think of a one-to-one comp, and please tell me if there is one. I'm sure there is, that I'm just in the moment not thinking of. So I just think we're in an unprecedented situation. I think my guess is also the league was facing the team was facing enormous pressure from the league to act on this in some way, because there was an outcry at the time about sort of what they deemed to be nothing happening, right? Yeah. Kyrie goes out and plays. This isn't me litigating this. I'm just telling you what the sentiment was. Like there was sentiment that something else should have been done by certain folks, that something should have been done by the Nets at the time to address the situation. And I think there was almost definitely people in the league that saw the Nets response initially as way inadequate, right? For what the end. And so I wouldn't be shocked if the league, after this latest press conference, said, you have to do something. And maybe they didn't need to be pressed at all, but I'd be also floored to think that there wasn't some conversation between those two parties to say, you have to do something serious here, because it just is looking worse and worse. Every second this goes on, it looks worse and worse.
And by the way, in the old, what it could have been done differently, I said Sean Marks had the sentiment of allowing cooler heads to prevail and keeping Kyrie away from media sessions for a few days. If you had maybe just said, we're just going to have Kyrie sit out a few games. We're not suspending him. We're going to have him sit out a couple of days. We want to have a conversation with him. We're going to let cooler heads prevail, and we're just going to have Kyrie stay off the court for a few games until we get to really sit down, because we don't want to press this. We don't want to try to do it in a vacuum. We don't want to be knee-jerk reaction here. If you had done that, maybe this all plays out a little bit differently. And that doesn't mean that Kyrie Irving doesn't still feel the same way that he does, or doesn't want to communicate the same things, but maybe he just delivers the right sentiment that people want to hear, and that it all gets communicated in the right order and the right context. And this doesn't end up being what it is. But as has been with the organization and with Kyrie Irving, and you said this before, when he has a belief in something, you are not going to move him off of that. And that's his right to stand on that, as he would say. But it does feel like this was also the absolutely perfect worst way that this could have all unfolded and been handled again. And the Brooklyn Nets are at fault here for not being more proactive around it. They seem to be very willing to see how it went before making an ultimate decision on it. Now it comes down to, I don't know, from the one other thing too, you were asking about examples of this that's happened before in sports. And obviously there have been, not necessarily as this specific instance, but it's a different era. Just in the country right now, in the world right now, right? Like things are not taken in the same way.
Yeah.
The way in which things are reacted to are not the same as they were 30 or 40 years ago. There's an era when you weren't saying anything to anybody. And then someone, a player speaking up about anything other than sports was considered to be very taboo. So as things evolve, so too do the way in which your words and the weight of your tweets and interactions, they get absorbed differently. And I think it's not easy. Don't get me wrong. Like, being in the public eye is not an easy task, and I don't envy people that are. However, you also are afforded, being able to play sports or being able to act in movies, whatever it may be, make music. Guess what? It does come with a little bit more scrutiny, and you do need to have a level of preparedness around that.
Yeah, I think we're going to probably close this out here. Emergency podcast. Like I said, We're doing this. You can see, if you're on YouTube, you can see in the background, we got the family out for dinner, and we were able to just sneak this one in time, just to make sure we could do it. But maybe we can try to answer this. Do you think, if you had a bet right now, even odds, do you think Kyrie comes back to the Brooklyn Nets this season?
No.
Ever? Well, let's put ever.
No.
Do you think Kyrie Irving plays in the NBA again?
Oof. Yes.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I'm pretty much on the same. I think I'm there with you on those two things.
I think he doesn't return this season, and I think next season he ends up with the LA Lakers with some time away, comes back in with a fresh, clean slate, and and has an opportunity, and as well he should. I'm not saying that he should never be. I'm not saying he shouldn't.
Oh yeah, look, I'm all for opportunity. Like, I'm all
for all of his loves and desires away from basketball. We've debated that too. Where does his best interest lie? I think he still does love to play basketball, and he'll want to. And we're both in agreement. I don't think we're disagreeing. We both agree. No one is undeserving of a second opportunity or a chance to have a clean slate. I just don't see it happening with Brooklyn.
Yeah, I agree. I think I would probably sum it up that way and say, yeah, if I were to guess now, I would like to see him back with the Brooklyn Nets, and I don't think it's going to happen, just sort of based on just to sum the show up here as we get out of here, just as knowing everything we've known about this situation over the last couple of years, based on what the Brooklyn Nets said in the statement, based on just kind of everything. I mean, if you're just taking in the holistic view of everything that's happened here, it would be very, very surprising. And I hope that both sides are able to come to some kind of agreement that they all find, to be acceptable, and that he comes back and plays. Like, I think that would be my preferable situation. But I just have to be pessimistic about that. Go ahead.
I'll briefly say, I think that the best thing for Kyrie Irving and for the Brooklyn Nets is that they don't come back together. And that's sincerely wanting the best for Kyrie Irving as an individual and as a basketball player. I don't think that this is the healthy spot for him. I think that it's been too many layers. There's too much scrutiny. He has now taken it on the chin far too many times. He came home, and that's like right tragedy. He comes to his home state or home area, and this is the way it pans out. I think it'd be best for him to be somewhere else for his career and for his personal life too, frankly.
Yeah, I think I probably agree with you on that one. I just going to say that I think that we'll probably have seen the end of the Kyrie Irving era in Brooklyn, and again, I hope it to not be the case, just because when it's all said and done, we do like watching Kyrie Irving play basketball. Okay, we're going to get out of here. Thanks for everyone to jump in to YouTube, hit subscribe, hit like and subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast. We'll be back again next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.